John Rawlings did not look like a man destined to rule Ghana when his name first entered the public consciousness. He was young, intense, and visibly different from the senior officers who dominated the Ghanaian military hierarchy. Yet, within a short span of time, this junior officer would become the most consequential figure in modern Ghanaian history. First as a rebel, then as an executioner, and later as a president whose shadow would stretch across decades. His story begins long before the firing squads, before the cheers and the outrage, before his name became synonymous with revolution. Rawlings was born in 1947 to a Scottish father and a Ghanaian mother, a background that made him stand out in a society deeply conscious of identity and hierarchy. He grew up disciplined, sharp-minded, and restless. The military appealed to him not simply as a profession, but as a calling, a place where merit, courage, and decisiveness could matter more than privilege or age. As a young man in the Ghana Air Force, Rawlings quickly developed a reputation that unsettled his superiors. He spoke openly about corruption. He questioned authority in a system that demanded obedience. While many officers quietly adapted to the perks and compromises of military rule, Rawlings burned with moral anger. He watched senior officers live comfortably while ordinary soldiers struggled. He listened to civilians complain of hunger, inflation, and humiliation, while leaders enriched themselves behind high walls. By the late 1970s, Ghana was exhausted. Years of coups and counter-coups had eroded trust. The economy was collapsing. Corruption had become normalized. To many, the country felt hijacked by elites who rotated power among themselves while the people suffered. Rawlings believed the military, which claimed to protect the nation, had betrayed it. In May 1979, Rawlings made his first move. Along with a small group of like-minded soldiers, he attempted a coup against the Supreme Military Council. It failed. He was arrested, beaten, and thrown into custody. To the established order, Rawlings was finished, a reckless junior officer who had dared too much. But history intervened. Instead of disappearing into obscurity, Rawlings became a symbol. When he was put on public trial, he used the courtroom not to beg for mercy, but to indict the entire system. He spoke passionately about corruption, injustice, and the suffering of ordinary Ghanaians. His words struck a nerve. Soldiers listening on the radio felt their own frustrations echoed. Civilians heard, perhaps for the first time, a military man speaking their language. The regime made a fatal mistake. They underestimated the power of anger already boiling within the ranks. On June 4, 1979, a group of soldiers stormed the prison and freed Rawlings. Within hours, the balance of power shifted. Barracks erupted. The Armed Forces Revolutionary Council was formed, with Rawlings at its head. Overnight, the man who had stood in chains now stood at the center of the state. Rawlings did not come as a reformer promising gradual change. He came as a revolutionary, demanding immediate accountability. His message was blunt and uncompromising. Those who had abused power would pay for it. Ghana watched in shock as the AFRC announced that former military leaders would be tried for corruption and crimes against the people. This was unprecedented. Never before had Ghana seen its former rulers dragged publicly before tribunals established by junior officers. The symbolism was explosive. The old hierarchy was being inverted. Power no longer flowed downward. It turned inward and devoured its own. At the heart of this moment stood Ignatius Kutu Acheampong, the former head of state, once feared and respected, now stripped of rank and dignity. Alongside him were other senior officers, men who had commanded armies and governments. They now faced Rawlings's revolution. Rawlings did not personally pull triggers, but he bore ultimate responsibility. He authorized the trials. He approved the sentences. He defended the executions. In his mind, this was not cruelty. It was justice long delayed. The tribunals were swift, intense, and emotionally charged. Evidence of corruption was presented. Testimonies poured in. The nation watched as once powerful men struggled to defend themselves. For supporters of the revolution, this was a cleansing fire. For critics, it was mob justice wearing the mask of morality. When death sentences were announced, Ghana froze. The idea that former heads of state and senior generals would be executed by firing squad was almost unimaginable. But Rawlings did not retreat. He believed that sparing them would betray the revolution and signal weakness. The executions were carried out quickly. Acheampong and others were taken away and shot. News spread like wildfire. Some celebrated openly, convinced that justice had finally been done. Others wept in private, horrified that the nation had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Rawlings defended the actions with unwavering conviction. He spoke of stolen wealth, broken lives, and moral rot. He insisted that the bloodshed was necessary to prevent future abuse of power. In his worldview, the executions were a warning written in flesh and blood. Leadership without accountability would no longer be tolerated. Yet even as he stood firm publicly, the weight of what had happened lingered. Ghana was cleansed, yes, but it was also scarred. Barely 3 months later, Rawlings handed power over to a civilian government, as promised. To some, this seemed proof of his sincerity. To others, it was merely a pause. And they were right. By 1981, Ghana had fallen back into crisis. The civilian administration struggled. Corruption resurfaced. Economic conditions worsened. Rawlings watched from the sidelines, increasingly convinced that the revolution had been betrayed. On December 31st, 1981, he struck again. This time, there was no hesitation and no immediate handover. Rawlings seized power and stayed. The man who had once claimed to be a temporary cleanser now became Ghana's ruler. His second reign was different. The youthful fire remained, but it was tempered by political calculation. Rawlings banned political parties, ruled through military councils, and cracked down on dissent. Critics were jailed. Newspapers were shut down. Fear returned, even as order was restored. Yet Rawlings also surprised many. Over time, he embraced economic reforms, worked with international institutions, and slowly transitioned Ghana back toward constitutional rule. In the 1990s, he reinvented himself yet again, this time as an elected president. The same man who had come to power through bullets now sought legitimacy through ballots. For his supporters, Rawlings was a rare leader who truly cared about the poor, who dared to punish corruption, and who sacrificed personal comfort for national discipline. They pointed to infrastructure development, relative stability, and Ghana's eventual democratic consolidation as evidence of his success. For his critics, he remained forever marked by 1979. They argued that he normalized violence as a political tool, that he executed men without due process, and that Ghana's democracy was built on fear as much as reform. They asked whether any cause, no matter how noble, could justify killing former leaders in the name of justice. Rawlings never fully retreated from the choices he made. Even in later years, when age softened his voice, he remained defiant about the executions. He believed history would vindicate him. He believed Ghana needed a shock to survive. When John Rawlings died in 2020, the nation mourned and argued. Tributes poured in. So did criticisms. His legacy refused to settle into a single narrative. He was remembered as a revolutionary, a dictator, a democrat, a disciplinarian, a patriot, and an executioner. What makes Rawlings' story so powerful is not just what he did, but what he represented. He embodied the rage of a generation that felt cheated. He forced Ghana to confront uncomfortable truths about leadership and accountability. He showed how quickly moral certainty can slide into authoritarianism, and how revolutions can consume both their enemies and their ideals. He was the young officer who ordered executions. He was also the president who ruled for nearly 2 decades. Between those two identities lies a story of power's dangerous allure, of justice pursued through force, and of a nation struggling to define the line between accountability and vengeance. John Rawlings did not simply change Ghana's history. He fractured it, reshaped it, and left behind questions that still echo. When leaders betray the people, who has the right to judge them? And when judgment comes from the barrel of a gun, does it cleanse a nation or haunt it forever?